like you explained how you made the place in your studio, but in terms of design, how much it was, whether it was easy to work with your father, or it was very, you ever shared the project in terms of design?
So I'm sorry. So I think when you have so he was a very, very strong person. Uh, he had his code of ethics, his way of doing things. And there was a sense of, how should I say, a sense of gravitas about him always. And I think, they were students, and I think that's one of the reasons that he remains that popular. There was a certain way that he wanted to do things. And he had a love for a few things which were inexplicable, right? And when you're a young person, you kind of wonder why is there so much love to want to do a public project which is never going to pay, or why would you want to spend so much time talking to somebody who's come to the office who you don't even know, and you're going to spend half a day talking to him when there's something where people waiting in the line. So you didn't understand that, when you started off. And I was naive. I mean, clearly naive. I didn't know enough. There was a bit of a rebelliousness in me. And I think it's safe to say that he was also very tentative about my being in the firm. So from 86 to, I think, close to about 95 or 97, I was on a salary which was lesser than the salary that other people were paid. So he very clearly put me on a very low salary, as my wife and I lived alone. So we found it difficult to run, but we said that's part of growing up and learning. But I think what began to happen is that, this bunch of projects that I showed you which turned around, and all of them suddenly appeared in 2000, and then suddenly a side of conversation went around about the kind of work that we were doing. I think at that point of time he started noticing, saying maybe, these guys are doing things differently, but maybe it's fine, maybe it's good. But he was still not sure whether it was good enough to carry on his firm. So it was only, I think, in about 2005 or 2007 that I finally became a minority partner in the firm. And that was for him a way of saying that, okay, that, I think you will do it right. It took 20 years to sort of, and this is not when he was doing work, because he had, for practical purposes, stopped doing like regular projects in the office by 95, because he was devoting more and more time in SEPT. So he was hardly in the office. So yes, I was running the firm, but it was in his absence, and he had made it very clear that you're running it in my absence. So it was difficult, but it was great. Yeah.
And about the academics, when you started the landscapes course, was it whether there was a debate how the academics should be
For sure, there was a debate, and a very strong one, because he came from the world of agriculture, ecology, and having worked in England. So he looked at the idea of landscape very, very differently. I was an architect with deep interest in history and even greater interest in the history of art and philosophy. So I read a lot. So for me, you could not be talking about design if you were only talking about ecology, or if you were only talking about nature. To me, that was the backbone of design. I mean, if you didn't have it, then anyways your design wasn't going to do well. But beyond that, what were you going to talk about was what I was asking. And he was saying, but in the country, even this people don't understand. So both of us understood what we were saying, and he said that, you first need to get people to understand even this at a preliminary level. And I was saying that if you get them to understand this at a preliminary level, they will believe that this is all that they need to do, and that the other layers that they need to do will never touch them. And so but that was a good fight. I mean, that was a bad fight. That was a great fight, because there were intellectual conversations, and I would cite projects or things to tell him how anthropology mattered. And these were foreign things to him. For him, it was very foreign. For me, ecology was very foreign. So, yeah, it worked. I think we had a good team going for some time. Yeah.
Yeah, so some part of that question is answered in this, but I think you would still answer it differently. What would a landscape architecture practice and an architecture practice, how would it be different? Because we keep looking at architectural practices as our reference points. We keep feeling that we never know enough about plans, and we are never the one who are equipped with ecological understanding to that level as an expert. And that if that is not your expert, and you are not an architectural practice either, you're working for architects as young firms, and you keep, kind of stressing yourself to reach there, which probably is not your domain, and comparing it or, referring to architectural works in landscape.
I'm not very clear what the question is.
Question is, architecture has a lot of references in terms of design philosophies, way of thinking, different masters you can look up to and learn from.
Sure.
Landscape, we don't know.
Got
and,
it.
we keep
Got it.
going back to architecture,
Got
and
it.
we don't reach there, not here.
Got it. Yeah. So, this whole thing of having too many references is a good thing and a bad thing, right? Because architecture's got too many references, they're trapped. And you can actually see what's happening to architecture in the country. That they're trapped between words that are coined: vernacular, local, sustainable, materiality. They're really trapped between these words. They have no space to move outside their words. So, if you believe that your job as a designer is to learn a language and to converse in that language and get some amount of education or learning to be able to start writing coherent phrases in prose and one day to write poetry, then architecture does not allow you to do it, because architecture is saying that all that is already written and you will have to follow it. The good thing about landscape is that it's not written, at least in the context of India. And it's not written anywhere in the world, and I've lectured all over the world. It's not written anywhere in the world. You can begin to look at what's happening around you, and if you really are a human being who's very sensitive to what's happening in politics, what's happening in culture, what's happening to your cities, and you draw stories from there and you start telling those stories. The end of the lecture is really at some point quotes with, finally it's all about stories. And that's the only thing that will stay. No architecture stays, no design stays. What stays are stories. And the idea is, how do you embed these stories? Architecture is so overpowered with the kind of stories that it needs to tell that it is unable to tell its own stories in the country. These are stories that are stories of modernism, or these are stories that are stories of what's happening in Europe or what's happening here. Who is telling the stories of what's happening in your yard, in the people around you? Landscape allows you to do it because it doesn't have it. So I, in fact, find landscape a far more liberating profession than architecture is. And it is because of that sort of thinking that allows us to do the kind of architecture that we do. Because we are not beholden to the methods of architecture of this country. So first of all, I don't think that landscape architect should ever worry about it. That's one. But the second is also, you have to realize that all of us as professionals, whether you're a landscape architect or an architect, we have some expertise in something. And we have no expertise in a lot of areas. But we have the mind to be able to put it all together. And that, I think, is unique, whether it's an architect or whether it's a landscape architect. You can put people on the table, and that could be an ecologist, that could be an artist, that could be a planner, that could be a mobility guy. You have the mind to get all of them to talk to each other and come up with something that's a spatial definition. I think that's a great skill. I don't know whether that answers your question.
Yes, it does.
Yep. One of the projects you showed in Gurgaon, how you worked with the structural designer in terms of break-in compression, break-in tension.
Too specific. So the structural engineer pretty much, we went to him and said, here's a wall. It was a dumb question. Here's a wall. How much can it tilt out before it falls? How much will it tilt this way before? It falls whichever way. And he sort of gave us pretty much a simple rule, saying, 1.5 feet for every so much of the height. You start doing, then it's going to fall. So every time you knew it was going to fall, that was the time to hold it. If it was going to fall behind, that was the hole to string it. It was that simple. And then we did the drawing. Then, of course, he did the math. But we designed it from that very basic understanding of how things bend and fall. Quite simple. There was no complicated narrative to it. So.
And how you balance attention to detail in landscape and in architecture. How you balance, because the details required, both requires the detail.
There's no question of balance here. I mean, in the sense that it's like a human being who walks in the room, right? Does he speak well or does he not speak well? And you will judge him for it. Projects are about whether they speak well or they don't speak well first. And details are what the voices of the project are. They better speak well. Then whether they make sense or not, that's later. But they have to speak well. Yeah. No, I don't think there's an option. So no balance. Nothing to do with scale. Yeah.
Okay, moving out of architecture and private spaces of garden, public infrastructure is in a vulnerable state right now. I heard in bits about multiple experts participating in a project would bring it a certain, but these things don't happen. At least I don't know how it happens abroad. If you have any references as to how these policy decisions are taken and whether different kind of experts come together, are architects or landscape architects the principal position or decision makers in projects of that scale?
Architects are
Some
never
examples.
the principal decision makers in any project. So, I think it's a myth that architects carry for themselves. Neither is a landscape architect. The politician is, the bureaucrat is, they are the decision makers, right? So that's the fact of life. Architects would then subsequently like to sort of make this story about it is their vision that led to something, but that's not true. That's never been true. So that I'm not worried about. I think the real thing that you have to understand is that, and this we were talking in the showroom that we had been in Prasanna's showroom that we had been to, and just before Prasanna came, we had a little conversation. So, and when I wrote that essay in 2004, I said, the country is changing, and as a profession, are we ready for the change? So first of all, I blame the profession. Whether it's the architectural profession or the landscape profession, we're just not working hard enough. The country is changing so rapidly around us, and most of us are resisting that change. Most of us are lamenting that change. But the change is going to happen. And now, if you manage to sort of find a manner in which to negotiate and do conversations in that change, then maybe you'll be able to do something good. Now, I think that's the first problem. So everybody shies away from it. That's one big problem. The other is that we've not upgraded our skills. So if you actually ask yourself or anybody, say that if you're an architect in the 1970s and you're now an architect in the 2023, what is the upgrade of skills that you've done over the 50-year period as a firm? And you will find that most architectural firms and landscape firms work exactly the way that they used to work 40 years back. There's no skill base. There is really no skill base or understanding how do you negotiate with different disciplines. How do you work with sanitation engineers, for example? Nobody wants to begin to understand that world. So, and you look at the average European firm that comes into country to work, and occasionally you bump into these guys. You just look at the process based, the way that they run their processes. And I think there's a lot that we have to be responsible for. That's the second problem. But the biggest problem is this, and this is what we were saying, is that the speed at which India is changing, there just aren't enough people. This is the truth. There are just not enough people to help and navigate. The commissioner who's walking up to you, the secretary who's walking up to you, he might be a crooked guy, but 9 out of 10 times he's not a crooked guy. 9 out of 10 times he's a guy who wants something quickly because elections are coming, but he wants it. And if somebody turns around and says, I'll tell you how to do this quickly and get what you want to get done, but let's do it right, so long as it serves his purpose, he's not saying no. So long as you've demonstrated it, so long as he has faith in you. There are just too few of us wanting to even engage in that space. So unless we deal with all three of it, and there are other things. We can complain about corruption, lack of vision, but I don't want to go there. Everywhere the world is corrupt, so I don't want to go there. I just think that as a profession, we have a responsibility, and I don't think that we are doing enough.
The numerous colleges And a lot of, I mean,
Well, let's
we
not
have
go
a
there. Let's
populace.
not- let's-
So,
There are a bunch of kids here, so no offense. Yeah. No, let's not go there. I mean, if things were working right, then you would have seen the change, right? At the rate at which India has grown, just in this regime, forget whether we like this regime, don't like this regime. This is not a political conversation. The rate at which India is changing from 2014 onwards, you will say, why it's doing the bad thing. Yes, I agree, it's doing the bad things. There are lots of things that it's doing which are horrible. But there are lots of things that it wants to do well. And the fact is there's nobody to guide them. Now, whose failure is it? So, yeah. But we should end at a happy note. Huh? I mean, so ask me a happy question.
In the presentation, you said you don't want to grow more than 45 people.
Yeah, why?
Why?
Good. Thank you, thank you. So, when my dad started the firm, there were 2 people, right? And then by the time I joined and things happened this, that, we were 10, 11 people. So, I realized that at 11 people, the big projects were eluding us. So, nobody was giving us the big projects, and we didn't have the bandwidth. When you have 11 people, you don't have the bandwidth, right? And then at some point of time, we grew because suddenly the project sizes started really becoming huge, and we became 75. At 75, I realized that I didn't know what was happening in the firm anymore. When I was just managing the firm, but I actually wasn't looking at drawings. I wasn't sitting and looking at a detail. There were projects happening that I was like, just saying, is it going on well? But more than that, I wasn't asking questions. And that was a horrible space to be in also. And when you get 75, you can't do the small project, because then it becomes unviable for you. When you're 11, you can't get the big projects because they're unviable for you. So, we went back and forth, and we reached at this golden number, which is 40 here. 40 allows us to do everything. It allows us to do a small project, it allows us to do a big project, we can oscillate back and forth. Life is good. So we are never going to expand. Yeah.
so do you have like a hierarchy of,
There's no hierarchy.
module or
Anybody
a
work-
team module or something like that?
We have no teams in the office. That's the other great thing. We have no teams in the office. Nobody in the office knows what drawing they're doing the next day. So somebody can be, Jayant was there, Jayant asked this question to people, and Jayant thought he was kidding. And the people came and told him, no, today we can be doing this project. You're drawing tomorrow, somebody will say, Abhi, usko de de. No, you're working on this. It doesn't matter. So there is no ownership of projects in the office. There are no teams in the office. Sure, Vinay looks at the bulk of the landscape work. Jigar looks at the bulk of the architectural work. Smriti looks at the bulk of the interior work. Alvika looks at the bulk of Bombay work. So that yes, but there's no ownership. So there's no one person responsible for whether, there are no teams in the office. And that's how it works, because if you've got 40 people and you're doing 85 projects, then you can't have teams. I mean, how will it work? You can only work because you keep moving people around all the time and creating this whole whirlwind in the office every day.
I mean, even at 50, it is that is it?
Of course it's a whirlwind. It's an incredible whirlwind. It's a fun whirlwind because you're in the eye. You don't know it. You're enjoying it, So it's fine. It works.
Cool. We should start looking at it like this.
It's a complete whirlwind. So, yeah. Dinner, guys.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Audience.
Good evening, sir. A lot of your ideas were highly genius or precise and very intuitive. Precisely 2 of them that very struck my mind, melted my heart a lot, were the uncomposed objects floating in space, how you incorporate that in the atrium, and the concepts in the fort in Rajasthan that you applied in different courts. My question is, what is your process in converting these ideas in your mind into physical manifestation? What is the process of doing that?
A lot of it is by accident. I mean, I don't think there's a great, architects love to say I thought hard and all, but it's not. A lot of it is accident, right? A lot of it is the fact that you sit around the table and you say, what will we do, right? And then we say, you're doing this office building, and how do you want it to be different? And somebody will say, there's a whole drudgery of getting to office, and you probably want to do something, and somebody says, office is the modern temple. So people say things like that, right? And then you sort of tell everybody in the office, saying, hey guys, here's a discussion now. go back and, let's come back with some. So it's literally this sort of very organic process. Devigad was pretty much intuitive because the place told me. So sometimes it is like that, but otherwise it's, you just talk. And because you talk in the office and you keep talking, one idea comes, something sticks, something doesn't, then you catch it, then you expand it. But that's the way it can be because, if you come with the idea of a premeditated story that you can tell in the project, so I'll tell you a nice story. We were doing one of my clients was doing a project with Renzo Piano, right? So I used to go to Renzo's office every few months to look at the progress of this project. This client is a very young, dashing developer. So one day he walks up to Renzo and he's saying this, Renzo, we really want this project to be like a marquee project in India. One of the marquee projects in the world, right? Young guy, he meant it. I mean, I love the man. And Renzo is like sipping wine and looking at all of us. He says, I have a filmmaker. And every movie he wants to do is a blockbuster. So he keeps doing it, and he keeps working on it. Then on the day it is shown, nothing happens. So that's the problem, right? I mean, you can aspire for everything to be a blockbuster, but it's not going to be here. So, I mean, you just plod along and you think hard, you read things, you make connections. You read, you dream. I think that's the way to do it. No process.
I just wanted to know that in the way you work, how much of whatever the creative output is, I believe what I could see is output of a dialogue, not a monologue. Dialogue at the studio, dialogue with clients to educate them as to why a project deserves what it deserves, and then a dialogue with the vendors and the contractors. So could you just elaborate on that?
So, I mean, it will shock a lot of people, but I don't draw in the office anymore. I have not drawn, I don't know for how many years now. It's only off recent, last few months that I felt like doing some sketches, so I did some sketches. But for many years, I've not drawn in the office. My job is to get people around the table, do a horrible doodle, like really bad doodle, and talk, right? And I will talk, and people will listen. And around the table will be senior architects, trainees, the whole bunch. And then depending on the nature of the project, then everybody will go to their tables and we'll meet again after the ordained time. And everybody will then start saying, what did this mean to them? Or did they think differently? And this conversation would go on and on and on for weeks till exactly like he's asking, some strands start making sense. Then you start catching those strands in some fishnet and seeing whether you can make a meal out of it. Sometimes you can't make a meal out of all of it. Sometimes you can. That's the process that we run. So we have, as Prachi was asking, we have no teams, we have no hierarchy. The trainee in the office can speak as much or as loudly as somebody who's in the office for 12 years. Everybody's voices are heard. And the client is always, I've written an essay about clients and architects and how, it's almost like marriage, right? I mean, when an architect wants a client, he courts around and goes and meets him for dinner. When a client wants an architect, he sort of drops hints and all like little courtship goes on. Then they sign a contract and then divorce starts, right? And I'm saying it's so stupid. I mean, like, what's wrong with you? Get married well. So, I mean, I actually tell clients, now we're married, sit on my side of the table. You're not sitting on the other side of the table. If you're in it, we are in it together. If it's a good project, it's ours. If it's a bad project, it's ours. And and actually tell them that there are rules of conversation. Everything will have to be rationalized, and every now and then you can be stubborn. It's a marriage, no? So every now and then you can be stubborn. By the same token, I can be stubborn. So long as these rules are followed, we are fine. And I literally tell people this. It works. But that's the way to do it, no? If the client is not in your journey, then there's no fun.
The question actually starts with a particular project, the mango tree house, where we have the pavilion between two mango trees. I've visited the project twice. Once was in '98, the next time I think was in 2002. And I loved that project. And it was a pleasant surprise to see slides of that project in today's presentation as well. Now the question is, after doing that project like 25, 30 years back, and now looking at the scale of the projects that the office is doing currently, would you still look at that project in the same manner that you did all those years back? Or is that still there somewhere? Particularly, I'm not questioning the ethos or the principles that the practice is based upon, but would you still look at that particular project in the same manner now?
Is the question, do I value the project now?
No. Would you look at it in the same manner? Because the sheer simplicity of that project is, the project is beautiful. I mean, it's very simple,
So thank
it's
you very much.
beautiful.
See, it's a difficult, I don't know how to answer this question, but I think we grow, right? I mean, things happen, life changes, you do projects, and then you look back every few years and you start collecting the things that are important to you. And everything is, they're important to you for different reasons, right? Devi Ghat is very dear to me for different reasons. A public park is very dear to me for different, so on and so forth. You do things at that time when you are in life. And I don't spend too much, I mean, I certainly look back at it and say, what did it mean? But I don't lament that. I mean, maybe I've lost some innocence, maybe I've gained some skill. I don't know. But, that's part of life, and I don't, I'm not much to look back.
I think what she's trying to ask is, say for example, hypothetically, if you had to do the same project again, would you do it the same way, or would there be another way of?
Okay, so I mean, there was a project that I couldn't show because of time, and this was a marriage landscape. So a young couple during COVID came to us, and we didn't even know them, right? And they texted Vinay and said, "We are getting married. Can you help us?" Right? And like in COVID, somebody sends you a message like that, it means very profound things. So Vinay sort of, I thought they wanted to run away and whatever. So I said, Vinay, what is this? So he said, "Mujhe bhi pata nahi." So I said, "Yeah, but aisa nobody sends messages like this." So I said, "Ruko, pooch to sahi." So this young girl, who's now become very dear to us, this couple, they said that, they were rich. So they said, we can't go out and get married, and now we have to get married here, so we don't know where to get married, and here's a piece of land that we have, right? So can you help us? But we said, like when you're getting married, and this was in October or something, and they wanted to get married in December. So I said, you got to be kidding me. What's going to happen? So they said, no, you have to help us. But deep faith. We dropped everything in the office. Vinay and I used to go there every week, and we planted crops, right? And it's on the website, so you can see it at some point. We planted crops, and we created this beautiful landscape of just crops. And it has great sense of geometry. It's got lovely poetry. It's got color variations. Amaranthus is growing. Marigold is growing. Tall grasses are growing. It creates spaces, creates partiality. And she got married there, right? And we didn't charge them fees because we said, somebody lets us do this in COVID for their marriage, boss, you can't take money from them. So it was a gratis thing. So is the question, does the heart melt very often? Yeah, it still does. But sometimes it doesn't. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. I will just say a vote of thanks. Thank you, Sant family. Thank you, Team R.O.A.D. I request Girish Doshi to present memento to Aniket. Thank you, Aniket. Yeah, next event of R.O.A.D is on 14th Feb, which is a Valentine. We are going to have Sankalp from Ahmedabad to present his work. So be with us. Thank you. Yeah, it is V.D. Joshi Memorial Lecture on his memory. Sorry. Yeah. So all the important people have chose the birthdays at right time. Thank you, everybody. We end the program.